The record that fell in Dallas on Monday was not set in the afternoon. It was set somewhere around 4 in the morning in the dark while most of the city was asleep and nobody was outside to feel it. The thermometer that night bottomed out at 86 degrees. That is the coldest it got. That is the low. And because the night refused to arrive, Dallas tied its hottest overall day ever measured with a daily average temperature of 97.5 degrees after climbing to 109 in the daylight. Read that again, because the shape of it matters more than the size of it. The city did not just have a hot afternoon. The city had an afternoon that never ended, a night that never showed up, and a morning that started where the previous evening left off. Right now, that same architecture is sitting over roughly half of the United States, and while it bakes one half, it is shoving water at the other. Two disasters on the same map on the same day. One machine driving both. I am going to show you how it works, what is confirmed, what is being exaggerated, and the one number in this story that almost every headline is getting wrong. If you want to keep track of what the planet is doing while it is doing it, and not 3 days later, subscribe now, because Earth Signal covers this the day it happens. Start with what the forecasters themselves are saying, because it is blunter than anything I could write. The Weather Prediction Center, in its short-range discussion issued Tuesday afternoon from College Park, Maryland, opened with the words dangerous, record-breaking heat continuing across the south-central United States into the southwest this week. Not warm, not above normal, dangerous and record-breaking in the first line before anything else. That same discussion says a strong upper-level ridge will remain anchored across the southwest into the south-central United States into late week, holding abnormal and hazardous heat in place across the region. Daytime highs of 100 to 110 degrees are forecast across the southern plains for Wednesday and Thursday. In the southwest, the valleys climb into the upper 90s and low 100s, and the deserts push up into the 110s. Now hold that same paragraph in your head, because 2 lines later the same forecast turns to water. Scattered instances of flash flooding rated level 2 out of 5 possible Wednesday and Thursday across the lower Mississippi Valley. Strong to severe storms ahead of a cold front from the mid-south into the Ohio Valley, then pushing into the northeast on Thursday. And out west, where the heat is worst, rainfall rates of 1 to 2 inches an hour with individual storms, dangerous over sensitive ground like burn scars and slot canyons. So, on a single sheet of paper, from a single office, on a single afternoon, the United States is being told it will roast and it will flood in the same 48 hours. Most coverage handles those as 2 separate stories with 2 separate anchors. They are not 2 stories. They are the same story seen from opposite ends, and once you understand why, you will never look at a summer weather map the same way again. Here is what happened on the ground before we get to the physics, because the ground is where this gets real. Near Chickasha, Oklahoma, about 35 miles southwest of Oklahoma City, the temperature on Monday reached 115 degrees. That was the hot core of the entire country that day. 115 degrees is not a number most people have a feel for. So try this. Set your kitchen oven to its lowest possible setting, the one you use to keep bread warm, and open the door. That breath of air that rolls out onto your face is roughly what the wind felt like across the Oklahoma prairie on Monday afternoon. Except it did not stop when you closed the door. It lasted from mid-morning until sunset, and it did not cool down enough overnight to reset anything. Dallas is the case study everyone in meteorology is quoting this week, and for good reason. By the time August is finished, Dallas may end up reaching or exceeding 100 degrees on 27 out of a possible 31 days. That would be one single day short of the record set back in 2011, a summer people in Texas still talk about with a particular tone in their voice. A Dallas-based meteorologist, Pete Delkus, put it about as plainly as anyone could on Monday when he wrote on social media, "Check on your Texan friends," and posted a chart showing triple-digit temperatures predicted to run for another 2 straight weeks. And this is where the scale of it stops being a regional story. According to the HeatRisk system run by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, roughly 98 million people across the United States could face major or extreme risk from heat impacts through the end of August, concentrated from the southwest across the southern plains and Texas. 98 million. That is not a count of people who will feel warm. That is a count of people inside the categories where the agency itself says that anyone without reliable cooling or reliable hydration is in trouble. If you gathered every person in that risk zone into one place, they would form the fourth or fifth largest country on Earth by population. And they are not spread across a continent. They are stacked into one corner of one country. The alert map backs that up. At the start of this week, more than 46 million people across 8 states were under a heat advisory, and close to 31 million people in Arizona, California, Oklahoma, and Texas were under the stronger product, an extreme heat warning. Those are two different categories, and the difference matters. An advisory means conditions that will make a lot of people uncomfortable and put some people at risk. A warning means the office issuing it believes the heat is dangerous, even by the standards of a place that is already famous for being hot, which is a remarkable thing to say about Phoenix in August. And none of this is landing on a cool summer. July of this year was the hottest month ever recorded for the contiguous United States. Dallas had its 7th warmest stretch from June through July on record, and August has been running roughly 5 degrees above its own average for the city, which sounds small until you remember that 5 degrees applied to every single hour of an entire month is an enormous amount of accumulated energy. Phoenix came through its own 3rd warmest June to July period on record. So the ground under this event was not neutral. It was already loaded, already dried out, already storing heat in asphalt and brick and soil that has had no meaningful chance to release it since spring. Out in the desert, the National Weather Service office in Phoenix has an extreme heat warning running for parts of southwest Arizona and southeast California, with afternoon temperatures forecast between 107 and 118 degrees, and it does not expire until 8 in the evening on Saturday. Further west, over the Chuckwalla Mountains, the Salton Sea, Kiriako Summit, and the eastern side of Joshua Tree, the same office has posted 103 to 114 degrees. The warning text is worth hearing in the agency's own language, because agencies do not write like this casually. It says heat-related illnesses increase significantly during extreme heat events, and that overexposure can cause heat cramps and heat exhaustion to develop, and without intervention can lead to heat stroke, and that heat stroke can lead to death. So that is the door. Now let me open the room behind it, because the mechanism is the part nobody puts on a thumbnail, and the mechanism is what tells you where this goes next. Picture a wide, fast river with a smooth surface. Now drop a boulder into the middle of it. The water cannot go through the stone, so it splits, races around both flanks, and piles up against the edges in fast, churning ribbons. Directly behind the boulder, the water goes strangely still. It sits, it stagnates. It warms in the sun because nothing is flushing it out. That boulder is the upper level ridge. The river is the jet stream, the belt of fast air that normally sweeps weather systems across North America from west to east like clockwork. When a ridge of high pressure this strong plants itself over the southwest and the southern plains, the steering current has to go around it. Air inside the ridge sinks. Sinking air compresses, and compressed air heats up, which is the same reason the bottom of a bicycle pump gets warm when you push down hard on it. Sinking air also kills cloud formation. So the sun arrives at the ground unfiltered, day after day, with nothing in the way. Then the feedback starts, and the feedback is what turns a hot week into a dangerous one. Sunlight hitting moist ground spends most of its energy evaporating water instead of raising temperature. That is why a lawn feels cooler than a parking lot. But after several weeks under a ridge, the soil has nothing left to give. Every bit of arriving sunlight now goes straight into heating the air. The ground gets hotter, which dries the soil further, which makes the ground hotter still. The atmosphere stops being able to cool itself off, and the ridge sits there getting stronger from its own success. Meanwhile, along the flanks of the boulder, the water is roaring. Moisture streaming up from the Gulf gets shoved around the eastern rim of the ridge and dumped into the lower Mississippi Valley, where a slow-moving frontal boundary is waiting to catch it and lift it. On the western side, monsoon moisture from the south wraps up and over the top of the desert and unloads on terrain that cannot absorb a drop of it. There is a distinction inside that heat that gets flattened in most reporting, and it changes who gets hurt. 115 degrees in the Arizona desert and 98 degrees on the Mississippi Gulf Coast can be equally dangerous, and the reason is sweat. Your body has exactly one high-powered cooling system, and it works by evaporating water off your skin. Evaporation is what carries heat away. In dry desert air, sweat leaves your skin almost the instant it appears, which is why people in Phoenix survive numbers that would sound fatal anywhere else, and also why they become dangerously dehydrated without ever noticing they were wet. In humid Gulf air, the atmosphere is already close to saturated, so the sweat has nowhere to evaporate to. It just sits on you. Your cooling system is running at full power and delivering almost nothing. That is what the feels like temperature, the heat index, is trying to capture. When forecasters across the South say the air temperature will sit in the 90s, but it will feel like it is well over 100, they are not exaggerating for effect. They are describing the temperature your body is effectively experiencing once you subtract the cooling it cannot perform. Along the Gulf and up through the lower Mississippi Valley this week, heat index values running near or above 100 degrees have been common, with nighttime lows staying in the upper 70s, meaning the recovery window never opens there either. That is why the map looks insane this week. It is not two weather systems fighting. It is one system, one enormous slow-spinning wheel of air, roasting the middle and wringing itself out along the rim. Which brings us to the flooding half, and to the fact that the flooding half is the part most likely to hurt someone in the next 48 hours. The Weather Prediction Center has a level 2 of 5 flash flood risk over the lower Mississippi Valley for Wednesday and Thursday. Level 2 out of 5 sounds mild. It is not mild in a place where the ground is baked to the consistency of a clay tile. Bone-dry soil does not drink water. It sheds it, almost like pavement, so rain that would soak in during a normal spring instead runs straight off, gathers in the low spots, and stacks up in creeks and street drains within minutes. And the rainfall rates being discussed are the dangerous kind, 1 to 2 inches an hour, according to that same discussion, especially over burn scars and slot canyons in the west. 1 inch of rain per hour means that if you laid out a football field, a little over 27,000 gallons of water is landing on that single field every 60 minutes. Now multiply that across a canyon drainage that funnels everything. It catches into one narrow channel, and you have the reason people die in flash floods in the desert on cloudless afternoons, standing in dry gravel, with the storm raining 10 miles upstream where they cannot see it. There is a second act to the water story too. Ahead of an approaching cold front, strong to severe thunderstorms are expected across the Mid-South and into the Ohio Valley. And then Thursday brings that same threat into the Northeast. The main hazard in this kind of setup is not usually the tornado everyone worries about, it is the wind. When a thunderstorm collapses in a very hot, very moist environment, the falling column of rain drags air down with it, and that air hits the ground and spreads outward in every direction, which is how you get 70-mile-an-hour gusts out of a storm that looked unremarkable on radar 8 minutes earlier. That is what knocks trees onto power lines. And a power failure during a heat wave is not an inconvenience. It is the mechanism by which heat waves become lethal, because air conditioning is the single thing standing between a vulnerable person and a hospital. Now, here is the honest part, and it is the reason I am making this video instead of just posting the map. When you see the word record attached to this heat wave, ask which record. Most of what will fall this week are daily records, meaning the hottest that specific calendar date has ever been in that specific city. Daily records fall by the dozen every summer somewhere, and a channel that shows you a wall of them without explaining that difference is selling you something. All-time records, the hottest that a place has ever been in any month of any year, are far rarer and far more meaningful, and they are not the bulk of what is happening this week. But here is the flip side, and it cuts the other way hard. The single most dangerous number in this entire event is one that almost nobody puts in a headline because it is not dramatic to look at. It is the overnight low. Dallas going to 109 degrees on Monday is a spectacle. Dallas only falling to 86 degrees before sunrise is the actual threat, and I do not say that loosely. The human body handles extreme daytime heat far better than most people assume, provided it gets a recovery window. Sleep in a cool room and your core temperature drops, your heart rate settles, your kidneys catch up. Take that window away, night after night, and the physiological damage accumulates instead of resetting. The research here is unambiguous, and it is worth knowing. A large study using more than 40 years of records across all 47 prefectures of Japan found that all-cause mortality rose by about 9%, following what the Japan Meteorological Agency calls tropical nights, meaning nights where the minimum temperature never drops below 77 degrees. That 9% held even after the researchers controlled for the daily mean temperature, which is the important detail. The nights were doing damage on their own, independently of how hot the afternoon had been. And it was not concentrated in one illness. Across 11 separate causes of death that the team examined, from cardiovascular disease to stroke to pneumonia to kidney disease, the overnight heat signal showed up in all of them. So when I tell you Dallas bottomed out at 86 degrees before dawn, I am not giving you trivia. I am giving you the number the emergency rooms will feel a week from now. There is one more correction to make, and it runs in the direction of alarming rather than reassuring. Official heat death counts in the United States are low. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, analyzing national vital statistics from 2004 through 2018, found an average of about 700 heat-related deaths per year. That number gets quoted constantly, and it makes heat look like a minor hazard next to hurricanes or tornadoes. But a separate peer-reviewed analysis covering 297 American counties, together holding about 62% of the national population, estimated that roughly 5,600 deaths per year were attributable to heat, 8 times higher in a study covering less than 2/3 of the country. Why the enormous gap? Because heat rarely writes its own name on a death certificate. It writes heart attack, it writes stroke, it writes kidney failure, it writes respiratory arrest in an 80-year-old with existing lung disease who had no working air conditioning during a stretch of nights that never dropped below the mid-80s. The certificate records the last event in the chain, not the thing that started the chain. So the honest version of this story is not that the news is overhyping the heat. It is that the official numbers have been quietly undercounting it for decades, and the part doing the killing is the part that photographs the worst. Ever been through a night like that? A night where the air in the house never cooled and the fan just moved warm air around and you gave up on sleeping around 3 in the morning? Tell me where you were and what year it was, because I read those comments and the pattern in them is its own kind of data. There is a second-order effect worth naming here because it is the one that turns a heat wave from a health story into an infrastructure story. Every one of those 98 million people is running air conditioning at the same hours of the same days, which loads the electrical grid at exactly the moment the grid itself is least efficient because transmission lines lose more energy when the air around them is hot. Heat waves are when demand peaks and capacity sags in the same afternoon, in the same direction. Add a line of collapsing thunderstorms knocking poles down along the edge of the ridge, and the failure points start stacking, and there is the air itself. Stagnant air under a strong ridge does not just get hot, it traps what is already in it. Sunlight, heat, and trapped exhaust are the exact ingredients that cook ground-level ozone, which is why cities under long heat domes end up issuing air quality alerts alongside the temperature warnings, as the Phoenix area has this month. For anyone with asthma, emphysema, or a weak heart, that turns a hot week into a hard one, and it does it invisibly with no dramatic image attached. So what do you do with all this if you are in it right now? Or if someone you care about is, for the heat side, the intervention that saves the most lives is embarrassingly simple, and it is a phone call. Older adults are the highest risk group in essentially every heat mortality study ever conducted. And the cruel detail is that the sense of thirst weakens with age. So the person most in danger is often the person least likely to notice. Someone living alone with a failing window unit will not call you. Call them. Ask specifically whether their cooling is working, not whether they are okay. Because people answer that second question with yes out of habit. Get the core body temperature down at night if you can, in one room, even a small one. If the power fails, that one-room strategy is what buys you hours. And if you work outdoors in the affected states, the guidance from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration referenced in these very warnings is frequent breaks in shade or air conditioning, shifting hard labor into the early morning, and drinking water before you feel like you need it rather than after. For the water side, it is one sentence, and it is the oldest sentence in American flood safety. Turn around, do not drown. 6 inches of moving water is enough to take an adult off their feet. Roughly 2 feet will float most vehicles, including trucks, and the road underneath may already be gone. More people die in floods inside cars than in any other place, and every one of those deaths began with somebody making a reasonable seeming decision about a road they had driven 1,000 times. Now, where does this go? And this is the part to bookmark. The extended forecast discussion issued Tuesday afternoon covers Friday through Tuesday of next week, and it does not end this. It repositions it. Dangerous late summer heat is expected to persist across the desert Southwest and far South Texas, and then shift back toward the central and southern plains and the mid-South over the weekend and into next week. In other words, the core of the heat is going to slide west into New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California first, where numerous temperature records are expected, and then swing back east. Anyone in Texas or Oklahoma who watches the alerts drop and thinks it is over may be looking at an intermission rather than an ending. At the same time, surges of monsoon moisture are expected to fire daily showers and thunderstorms over parts of the Southwest and the Intermountain West and the Rockies, with localized flash flooding possible. Which means the same paradox continues into September. The hottest, driest-looking ground in the country will be the ground most likely to produce a wall of water in a canyon. There are 3 specific things I am watching, and you can watch them with me. The first is Saturday evening. That is when the extreme heat warning covering southwest Arizona and southeast California is currently set to expire at 8 in the evening. Whether that gets extended again is the cleanest single indicator of whether the ridge is loosening or digging in. It has already been extended more than once. The second is the last day of August. Dallas is sitting on a possible 27 days at or above 100 degrees this month, against a record of 28 from 2011. That count closes at midnight on the 31st, and it will tell us in one clean number whether this August belongs in the same conversation as the worst modern Texas summers or just near it. The third, and the one I would put money on mattering most, is the overnight minimum temperature in the big southern cities over the next 4 or 5 nights. Not the highs, the lows. If Dallas, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, and the Gulf Coast metros keep failing to drop below the mid-80s before sunrise, then the health impact of this event will keep climbing quietly for another week or 2 after the maps stop looking dramatic and the news trucks go home. That lag is why heat waves get reported as weather and remembered as disasters. One boulder in the river, half a country baking in the still water behind it, half a country getting hammered along the edges where the current is forced around. It is one of the more elegant things the atmosphere does, and one of the more expensive. We will be tracking whether that ridge holds through the weekend, whether the warnings get extended past Saturday night, and where the flash flood risk lands as the moisture wraps back around. Subscribe and turn on the bell if you want those updates as they break rather than after, because this system is not finished with the United States, and the next chapter of it starts in about 72 hours.